Hello and welcome back to YouTube for Healthy Adolescent Development. My name is Kaylee Kernielsen. I'm a trainer, facilitator, and social worker, and I specialize in all things adolescent health and development, including the especially tricky topics like social media, dating and relationships, and identity formation. Today I'm going to talk about something that is under that bigger umbrella of teen dating violence, and that is digital dating abuse. This is a topic that I get a lot of requests for, and actually something that I see discussed a lot less often than some of the other topics around relationships and dating for teens and young adults. So today I'm going to go through a definition of digital dating abuse, some examples, and also some warning signs. So any youth serving professional or parent or caregiver can kind of have the 101 on what digital dating abuse is and what to look out for with the young person in your life. First and foremost, digital dating abuse is when one person in a relationship or someone who used to be in a relationship use technology to repeatedly harass a romantic partner with the intent to control, coerce, intimidate, annoy, or threaten them. And two things actually that I want to point out from that definition is one, of course, it's using technology, and technology can mean several different things. So that can mean using a phone, text messaging, using tracking on a phone, or using social media platforms, things like Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, etc., all the different platforms that are really popular with young people. And I also want to emphasize that all dating violence and digital dating abuse included are a pattern. So these are things that are happening more than once over a period of time, not a misunderstanding that happens once, not a sort of a one-off thing that can be chalked up to a miscommunication. These are things that are happening over and over across time. So digital dating abuse, like I mentioned, is kind of under that umbrella of teen dating violence. And when I think about teen dating violence, I think of typically 5 different types that we see. So first is the obvious one, which is physical abuse. We also see a lot of mental and emotional abuse, things like name calling, put downs, attempts to control the other person, sexual abuse, financial abuse, and then digital abuse, I would say, is the 5th type of teen dating violence. So often, digital dating abuse is a part of the bigger picture when it comes to an abusive relationship. Research has shown us that when young people report that they're experiencing digital dating abuse, they're also experiencing something that's happening in real life or in face-to-face interactions as well. So it's important to kind of consider it as a part of that bigger picture, and typically is not just happening in isolation. There is a chance that maybe the abusive behaviors start in a digital space, especially because young people are so active when it comes to technology and social media, but often things are happening in person as well. And I think that's important to consider when you're thinking about safety or when some of these things are happening, that it's probably not just on technology or via social media. The other thing to keep in mind about dating violence in general is that things aren't all bad all the time. And this kind of helps us understand why people might stay in an unhealthy or abusive relationship. So typically there's a period where things are really happy, good, things are going smoothly. There's a period where tension is building, things feel off, something's a little bit wrong. And then there's some, abusive incident. So that might be the name calling incident. That might be a big blow up fight. That might be a surge of jealousy. And then there's a honeymoon period where the person will apologize, say, I'm so sorry, I don't know what came over me, this will never happen again. And then we kind of move back through that cycle where things are going well, there's tension building, there's an incident, etc. And what can also be tricky is that these incidents can be far apart. Often at the beginning, things are farther apart. And so those periods of honeymoon phase and things where things are going well and feeling good are pretty long in between when the incidents occur. So again, that might be another reason that someone is staying in a relationship that has some of these abusive or unhealthy tendencies going on. So how is digital dating abuse particularly relevant for teens and young adults? The answer is obvious. Teens and young adults are native technology users, and their phones and social media are a huge part of their lives. And I don't really necessarily think that's a bad thing, but it might be a part of their lives that's less visible to the caring adults that are around them. So they might not have access to their social media, they might not have access to their phones. And I'm not a huge proponent of adults having surveillance over adolescents' technology use. I do think there should be some guardrails and guidelines, and that's a whole nother conversation for another day. But when it comes to digital dating abuse, it is really helpful to know what that might look like, so caring adults can have an idea of what to look out for and offer support if this is something that's going on. For example, there are lots of ways that sort of your more typical mental and emotional abuse can be perpetrated via technology. Pretty much all of it can be perpetrated via technology. So things like peer pressure, intimidating someone, minimizing how they feel about things, or threats obviously can all be done via text, via social media, online in those spaces. So an example would be, oh, everybody shares passwords. Everybody lets their partners look through their phone. It's not that big of a deal. I don't know why you won't just let me look through your phone. Again, it could be a one-time thing where someone is feeling insecure in a relationship and we talk about it and we come out better on the other end. But if this is a pattern of behavior where I'm always insisting that I look at your phone, I'm always sort of accusing you of doing something that they're not supposed to be doing, that's when we're getting into some of these patterns. There's another 3 big categories of digital dating abuse, and that is monitoring and control, direct digital aggression, and sexual coercion. And so I'm just going to go briefly through examples of the 3 of those. So digital monitoring and control, for me, is the first type that typically pops up in my mind when I'm thinking about digital dating abuse. This might be constant messages. Where are you? Who are you with? Pressure to respond right away to a message. Monitoring someone's whereabouts or activity. So something like insisting that I location share with them so that they always know where I'm going and what I'm doing. Monitoring who my partner talks to. So, oh, I saw you commented on that person's Instagram post, but you didn't comment on mine. Or, oh, I don't want you to follow that person for whatever reason. Also things like pressure to share passwords or using private information to check on that person, again, without their permission. So those are sort of those like digital monitoring and control. So the second type is that digital direct aggression. So this is things like sharing embarrassing information without the person's permission. So I have a picture and I share it without their permission, or I blast it on social media, or I Snapchat it to everybody in my contacts list. Things like sending mean or hurtful private messages, spreading rumors about the person, or pretending to be that person. So maybe I've pressured them into sharing their password with me, and then I pretend to be them and send messages to friends or post things acting like I'm them on their social media accounts. And then the last is the digital sexual coercion, which again, obviously sexual abuse is a part of that bigger umbrella of teen dating violence, but often we see this through technology where someone is pressuring for sexually explicit images or videos from their partner, and then sometimes sharing it without their permission or sending it to other people, or even just using the phone to like constantly ask for sexual activity from that person. The thing that I always like to share with young people when I talk about sexting is that I don't want to scare tactic them because typically scare tactics do not work, but I always want to make sure that they have all the information that they need to make an informed decision. So sort of setting aside any coercion or pressure to take or send photos, Even if that's not present, I think it's important for young people to know that if they are under 18 years old, it can be considered creation of child pornography, even if they take a photo of themselves or a video of themselves. If they send it, it can be considered distribution of child pornography. And if someone has it in their possession, it can be possession of child pornography. So I think that that's really important for young people to know, because they're not thinking about themselves in terms of being children, because they're young adults, they're adolescents. They are not children. But when it comes to the law and sexually explicit images, they can be considered as such. So that's just a little side note when it comes to sexting or explicit photos. Of course, when it's in the context of an abusive relationship, or if I feel like the person's going to be mad at me or break up with me or physically hurt me if I don't send a photo that they're asking for, we're of course, in that realm of threatening, abusive behavior within an abusive relationship. And that would be a form of digital dating abuse. If you're seeing any of these behaviors that I just mentioned, of course, those are going to be warning signs and red flags. If you're a parent or a caregiver or a youth serving professional, a couple of other things you might want to look out for is a young person suddenly being extremely nervous or worried to be away from their phone, right? So that's telling me that someone is maybe getting upset if they're not responding right away, or pressuring them to answer in a certain amount of time. So if you notice a change in behavior in terms of, we have a family rule that our phones are away at dinner time, and they're suddenly very antsy and anxious that they can't get to their phone, and you know that they have this relationship that they're in. Always, 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 if you notice them isolating from friends, family, or activities that they have typically enjoyed, that's always a huge red flag for me, because isolation is one way that keeps people from reaching out for help or sharing what's going on with them when it comes to abusive relationships. So that would be a number one red flag that I would look out for too. Of course, if they mention anything related to threats, put downs, that their partner checks their phone or their social media, or they sort of brush off things like, oh yeah, well, we share passwords, or oh yeah, well, I have to share my location with my partner because they just get really jealous or they just get really worried about me. That would definitely be, piquing some interest in my brain to have a further in-depth conversation. What else is going on in the relationship? Asking some of those direct questions like, oh, okay, how do you feel about that? Is that comfortable for you? Is it reciprocal? Getting into conversations about trust. If you really trust the person, what does it mean that you have to be tracking their location, and digging a little bit deeper with that? Of course, I wouldn't ever assume immediately that someone was in an abusive relationship. I always want to just ask more questions, be curious, and really understand the context of the whole relationship. Another thing that I would look out for is negative comments, put downs, hurtful things that are seen as just a joke or brushed off as just a joke, because those things can still be really hurtful for someone. You might see a negative comment, or they repeat a negative comment back to you, and you kind of wonder like, oh wow, like, didn't that hurt your feelings, or didn't that make you feel bad? And they're like, oh no, they were just joking. I would pay attention to that a little bit, because it could be true. Maybe it is just a joke, or maybe it's part of a larger pattern, and the abusive person is downplaying their comments or kind of gaslighting their partner to say like, oh, it's not a big deal, I was just joking. So that's something else to kind of keep an eye out on. And I would just say any big change in how they're using their phone or their social media, so like abruptly deleting all their social media accounts. Sure, that happens. Young people decide to do that because they're setting their own boundaries around that, and they're trying to see what that feels like. And sometimes it's their partner saying like, I don't want you on Instagram, I don't want you on Snap, I don't want you on TikTok, and you see that kind of behavior change. So again, getting curious, asking more questions about context. And also I would say spending a lot more time or even a lot less time on their phone. So it might be that they are feeling isolated from friends, and so they're not texting with them as much, they're not FaceTiming with them as much, and you notice that. Or on the opposite, there's constant messages, they feel pressured to be texting someone back immediately. Those can both sort of be two sides of the same coin when it comes to kind of red flags in terms of that digital dating abuse behavior. The thing that I want to end on is that it can be really context specific, especially for those of us who are not native social media or smartphone users. Like myself, I didn't grow up having a smartphone or having social media. And so certain behaviors might be totally fine and healthy, but they're just out of the norm from how I experienced dating as a young person. So I think for all adults, parents and caregivers, youth serving professionals, it's important for us to take that into account. One example of that might be we're texting back and forth 50 times a day, me and my dating partner. To someone who never had texting when we were young, we might be like, wow, 50 texts is a lot of text messages. But for a young person, texting 50 times back and forth throughout the course of an entire day, we're having a conversation, we're having fun, we maybe are in the new phase of a relationship, getting to know each other, that's maybe not that big of a deal. So it's helpful to think about the whole context of a relationship. Are there other things that are controlling? Are there other things that cause a lot of stress and anxiety? Someone feels like they have to be constantly plugged in, or they're, again, isolating from friends or family. Pay attention to those pieces as well. Another example might be someone gets into a relationship and their partner follows all of their friends on Instagram and Snapchat. I could see, again, two sides of that happening. One where they're trying to check up on me and they've now followed all my friends because they want to know my whereabouts. Or they're trying to connect with the friends in my network, get to know me better, connect with the people that are important to me in my life. And again, it's just going to be really dependent on that context. So you're asking questions, you're getting to know the relationship and some of the other pieces of it to know whether some of these behaviors are healthy, unhealthy, or abusive. And I always tend to think about it on that continuum. If the behaviors are repeated, they're on that unhealthy or abusive end of the spectrum, that's when we're wanting to talk to that young person about their mental health, their physical safety, and we're moving into some interventions that might include safety planning or helping them to leave the relationship. But most importantly, we're leaving that door open for them to come to us and have conversations and know that we'll be there regardless of if they're ready to leave the relationship at that moment or not. I am really curious what additional questions people out there might have about digital dating abuse. This is, again, something that was not talked about quite as often. And I will plan to do a part 2 where we talk more about safety planning as well as how to help young people who are in abusive relationships and what we can do to support them. Thanks so much for tuning in. See you next time.